Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Airlines. It's time to take a look at the JC Wings March announcements, which came out just towards the end of last week. And JC Wings, as always, splits their announcement sets with models which they've made and just need to get out to the retailers, and models which they are just announcing and have really only just decided to make quite recently, and so therefore have a much longer gestation period associated with them. Now, in this set, there's actually kind of three different types of models. You've got the models which are already produced, of which there's only two. Then you've got models which they appear to have artworks designed for already. So presumably they're a little bit further along than the models they've only just thought of. There are four models here which have got artworks already existing for them. And then the rest of the models, I think it's about 9 or so, have got just a picture, a photograph of the aeroplane. So those ones are much further along. You're not going to be seeing those for a much longer period of time. Now, there has been a trend recently for JC Wings that there have been a lot less of the models which are about to be released and far more future releases. And I think that's because they have finally started emptying out that giant warehouse which has been full of models for many, many years. And that's partly because they've been releasing more models per month than they ever used to. They've been kind of trying to match the sort of output that NG's been producing. So you've been seeing release sets of 20 plus models, which isn't historically what JC would have done. This month, there are actually only 15 models that have been announced, if you don't include the flaps up and down varieties. And as I said, only 2 of those are models that actually have pictures of the releases, and the rest are all future models, but 4 of them slightly probably less future-y than the others. Okay, now, as far as this year has gone, I've actually quite liked where JC's been going. The sets have been quite diverse. They've begun to use some molds which they haven't been using before regularly. That's not always a good thing, but they've got a lot of good molds hidden away. And last month, for example, there were 2 or 3 models I'm looking at that set and going, hey, I'm almost certainly going to get that. So from where I'm standing, I'm quite liking what I'm seeing here. And there is quite a lot of diversity, which I always think is a good sign for any set. So this month, I would say 15 models that have been announced. But again, there's a surprising amount of interest here. We're going to get into looking at that just a second, but before I do that, obviously, as always, chuck a like on the video if you're enjoying the content. Subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all my subscribers. Thank you very much. And check me out on my other channels on Instagram at Yesterday Airlines and Facebook, obviously, too. And don't forget yesterdaysairlines.com, the website, which is where most of this material emanates from effectively. Just recently at the site, I've been looking at the history of HYJL Wings, one of the more obscure but actually quite prolific brands over the last 4 or 5 years. A brand sadly no longer with us, but one that I really like myself. So check out the 2 parts I've done on HYJL. I also did my weekly review last week, obviously, so don't forget to check out the weekly review. There'll be another one coming this week, surprisingly, hence why it's a weekly review. And in fact, this week's one is, I think, going to be featuring the new Aviation 400 A350 with the detachable landing gear. So keep an eye out for that. Last week's one was an NG Models Boeing House Colored 747 SP. Try and get one of those out each week. Try and spread across the manufacturers. But let's get on and see what JC are hitting us with this March. Okay, so we'll start with the 2 models where we have pictures of the finished models, and which means they should surely be only a month or 2 away from your retailer. And both models this month that have those images are Australian. The first up is a Qantas Freight, or Australia Freight, A330 passenger to freighter conversion for a Series 200 VH EBF. The aircraft is nowadays called Hercules, as I have checked, and it was converted not long ago, just towards the end of September 2023. Now, what is interesting about this release, and what I quite like about this, is that it shows the aircraft just after it was converted and prior to it being repainted into the Qantas Freight scheme, which is quite cool. So you've got, you can see where the airframe's been modified. You can see where the new side cargo door has been put in. You can see the new paneling and where the paint has been stripped off. And I'm really liking this idea. I think it's really interesting and a good idea, and one that's nice to see. And something which nobody else is doing either. So it's nice to see JC doing something unique. There have been previous Qantas Freight A330 P2Fs. NG made one last year in June. And Phoenix, I believe, I don't know, actually, I don't believe. There's just been that NG one, actually. I thought there'd been more. But what I like about this one is it's very unique. There's nothing else quite like this on the market. I quite like, and I'm beginning to get more interested in these kind of one-off, unusual schemes that add a bit of variety to your collection. Now, in terms of the A330 mould that JC have got, I've historically said that I'm not its biggest fan. It's probably the second weakest A330 on the market. I think the AB400 was probably the weakest. And the problems are mainly to do with the landing gear, which needs to be longer. And this is a running theme with some JC molds, especially the main gear. But having said that, it's not a disaster. It's not a dreadful mold. It's just not a great mold. It's a mold which I usually workhorse. And in this case, however, the interest that the model adds, being so unique and unusual, actually, I think I'm going to put this up into high flyer. I kind of like this. I'm really quite keen on it. And if I was a Qantas collector, it's a model I'd almost certainly get. It shows, the history of this airframe, its transition from passenger to a freighter. I think it's really nice. So I'm going to put this one up into high flyer. The second model that we have is at Qantas mainline, and this one is a 7879. It's VH Zulu November Foxtrot. So this one is a standard 787. This one comes up in flaps, up and down. And it's not like it's unique by any means. Phoenix made VH Zulu November in October in this scheme on their updated 787 mould. There have obviously been other versions. There was an AV400 one mid last year, for example. There was a Gemini one in 2021. I think there's pretty much, there's been an NG one, that's very old, 2019. So there's been a few of these around. It's not unique by any means. But I do really like this scheme from Qantas. I know it's just a classy update to the classic livery, and I really, really like the JC Wings 787 mould. I think it's a really impressive casting as well. So there's a lot of good stuff going for this if you don't have one of the previous releases, all of which are pretty decent. I mean, the Phoenix is probably the weakest, but they've upgraded their 787 and it's not that bad, or certainly not as bad as it used to be. So I'm looking at this going, this model looks really good, and it's tempting to put it in high flyer, but there have been 4 or 5 previous versions, albeit the most recent one was, I guess it was only 3 or 4 months ago, wasn't it? Okay, I'm talking myself out of high flyer. I think I'm going to put this one into workhorse, but it does still look like a really nicely finished model. So certainly no reason not to get it if you haven't already got Qantas 787. And if you're a fleet collector for Qantas, then I imagine this will be a good release for you. And I don't think this reg has been made previously. Okay, cool. So that takes us out of the models which you've got pictures for. Only 2 this month. So that's quite unusual. But as I said, we've got 4 models where we do appear to have some at least semi-finished artwork. So presumably those ones will be around a little bit quicker than ones where you're just seeing a photograph being used. The first one up is a Vietjet Air A330-300 in a special scheme. The reg is VN Alpha 814, and I believe this is the livery which they used when they took delivery of their first A330, which was a few years ago. I think it was towards the end of 2021 in December, I think. Actually, it might be Christmas Day even. So it's quite a nice scheme, actually. I can't really argue with it. It's got, actually, the Vietjet scheme itself, just the base scheme, is surprisingly nice. It's got this kind of ribbony element to it, and there's only a relatively small portion of the fuselage which is Euro white. This one's got this Vietnam logo on the front, which I don't think is part of the standard Vietjet scheme. But again, it looks quite nice, and it's really good. There haven't been any other Vietjet Air wide bodies made, so that does make this quite a unique release. There have been some previous Vietjet Air, Phoenix have made a series of A320s, and there have been a couple of A321s made by Gemini, but there's been nothing on the wide-body scene. So, once again, the limitations of the A330 mold that JC have are slightly overcome by the uniqueness of the release here. And again, if I was collecting these sort of modern wide bodies from Asia, then I'd be looking at this and thinking this is probably going to be quite a cool model. There's certainly no sign that anyone else is looking at releasing it. So for me, again, I'm tempted to this one up into high flyer, even though I don't necessarily think the mold is the best. Next up, we've got an A340-600. It's Etihad in the Formula 1 scheme, A6 Echo Hotel Juliet. So, looking through what's been made here, there have been quite a few versions of this model made previously, but not for a while. Phoenix made this same reg in 2017 and 2015. And it's also, I think, been made by Herpa as well. That's 2011 and 2009. They've made it a couple of times as well. So it's been made a few times, but not that recently. But I would expect the best one of those to be the most recent, which is that 2017 Phoenix version on their very nice A340-600 mold. The JC Wings Gemini A340-600, nowhere near as good. It's got a seam, so it's an old cradle mount mold. It's okay, but it's not as good, you know. And this is, I think, the second A340-600 they've released recently, though I still have some pictures of the other one, which is the China Eastern special scheme. Better City, Better Life, that one. Yeah, it's not thrilling me, but I can understand why they're releasing it. I can sympathise with the reasons. It's been 8 years since it was last made, so I think that's not a bad idea to get one out, but the mould is not really up to standards. I'm going to put this one down into a workhorse. You know, it's not bad, but it's not great, and it's certainly not as good as the one that was made 8 years ago. Next up, we've got a 747-400, and this one is Singapore Airlines in the tropical scheme. It's 9V Sierra Papa Kilo. Flaps up and down yet again. On obviously the relatively, I say relatively, it's like 5 or 6 years old now, but on that newer 747-400 mold that JC have got, which is a really nice mold, as long as the undercarriage is looking okay. Sometimes it just looks too short, but broadly a great mold. The tropical scheme is pretty cool. It's a real colour splash. It's like the Peter Max 777 that Continental had. You know, it's just like throw a huge amount of colour at the airframe, and it does look pretty good. Now, the only drawback for this release is that I know HX models have also announced it, and you can't help think that the reason that JCA have announced it is because HX have announced it. And the HX 747-400 is also very good, and also comes up in flaps up and down varieties. Comes with a stand and that kind of stuff as well. So, yeah, I'm not sure which is better, to be honest. I'm still kind of on the fence. The previous HX 747-400s I got didn't have the cockpit pretty particularly well, but they do have a better undercarriage height. It's really very up in the air. They're both going to be really good. Looking at tropical Singapore 747-400s, there have been quite a few again, but again, not for a long time. 2015 was the last time one was made by Big Bird Mark III, and the earlier ones go back even further, 2012 for an old Phoenix version, and 2009 as well for another old Phoenix version, and then there are some very old versions made by brands that you don't care about or are never going to see again, like CNC made one in 2006. I mean, the reality is there hasn't been a lot that's in this space that's been made, so definitely lots of potential for it, but you got to choose between this one or the HX models release, which will be out probably sooner, I would have thought too. I'm going to put this one up in the high flyer. I do like the mould, and I do like the livery, even though it is a bit wow in your face. It's probably a little bit too modern for me to be buying. I have to say my Singapore collection kind of tries to end just around turn of century. I don't really have anything newer than that. So not one for me, I don't think, but I do like the look of it, and it's quite tempting. Model number 6, and the last of these models that appear to have some artwork for them, is a Boeing House Colours 767-200 N767B Now, no one's made a House Colours 767-200 before, so that stands this model in good stead. The only real drawback here is the artwork doesn't seem to show any Airbus or aircraft logos, airline logos even. Get it right third time. And I don't think I've ever seen the aircraft without those. And secondly, just the age of the mould that the JC are using. Obviously, it's coming on their seamed mould. It's quite a nice mould. I've got a few of them, but you got new moulds from Panda, you got new moulds from NG. They're gonna be better. So getting these kind of old seam moulds is sometimes a little bit. Yeah, in 2025, I'm looking at this sometimes and thinking, is it really worth it? I'm not sure. I also happen to kind of know that we may be seeing something like this year as well. So it may be worth waiting. I certainly wouldn't pre-order. In fact, that goes across the board. Don't pre-order models. And certainly don't pre-order JC Wings models. I still think this will be an okay release. And I'm going to put this one up to... I think I'll put this one up to High Flyer as well, actually. I'm getting quite a lot of High Flyer, and that's good. I mean, I actually quite liking the spread of the models here. I'll put this one in High Flyer, but the mould is old, and that does, you know, if there was something between Workhorse and High Flyer, it would probably be sitting there. It's in the lower end of High Flyer, I'd say. So that is the top 6, or the first 6 models out of the way, ones you might see quite quickly. We've still got models 7 to 15 to go through, and those are models which we only have a photo to base our discussion off of. That means they're likely to be models that haven't even begun production, haven't even really thought too much about it, and they're going to be some time. I would probably guesstimate at least 9 to 12 months, but maybe more, you never know with JC. So we'll have a look through those models now. First up is a model that's using a mould we haven't seen very much, but unfortunately in this case that's a good thing we haven't seen it because it's awful. It's the JetX A300 mould, which was used by Gemini for that pretty poor Emirates version last year, and there's also been an Olympic version which was announced too. This one is Korean Air, HL7280 is the registration, and you know, it is a worthy release in the sense that there hasn't been a release of a Korean Air A300 for 15 years, or 16 years now. And the last time round was Aero Classics in 2009. There have been releases of JetX ones on this mould, which will effectively look very similar to this, that were made around 2008, albeit they had different landing gear and didn't have the aerials. This mould is just a bit of a dumpster, unfortunately, or a dumpster fire. It's got a huge seam, and not one that follows any kind of natural lines. And the shape of the fuselage isn't great. The engines are really close to the ground, even with the updated landing gear. It's just not a good mould. It's a really poor mould. So even though this is a really good suggestion for an A300 and one that I'd be super interested in, it's not one that I can really get on board with, especially as we still do have the YU A300 coming. It's just taking a little while. And Aero Classics have been releasing quite a few A300s too. So this one's not doing it for me. I'm going to put this one down into Gas Guzzler. Staying with our Airbus products, however, we move to, you know, a very much more recent Airbus product, and we've got the A220-300. And this one is in the colours of CSA, Czech Airlines, though of course it isn't really Czech Airlines anymore because CSA doesn't technically exist. But they've still got one aeroplane flying around in their colours, and it's this OKEYA. I've talked before about some of the failings of this mould, specifically related to the undercarriage and the shape of the nose and the incorrect sizing of the cockpit windows, and they do give me some reservations about this. But at the same time, nobody else, again, has announced this model, and no one else really has the mould anyway. So it's quite cool. It's a European narrow body, and I know that European collectors are crying out for more European narrow bodies than a modern. It's a shame CSA is not really flying anymore, and this is a kind of cheat scheme, but it does look pretty cool. And yeah, I'm going to put this one up in the high flyer. Again, even though I have some mould reservations, if I was being really strict with the mould, I'd be putting this and those A330s probably into workhorse. But I think this one actually will turn out quite well. Model number 9 is a Virgin Atlantic A340-300 GV Hull. And this one's in the scheme before the last scheme I think they wore. It's got that deep bluey purple outline to the tail area, which I was never entirely certain about it, but it looks pretty good. It certainly looks better, I think, than the more recent updated version, which was released last by Phoenix in 2022, where the tail, the red on the tail slants across the rear fuselage at the opposite angle, and they've simplified it, got rid of the dark purpley blue, and have billboard tiles, which it just doesn't look as good. This one does look pretty cool, and I think will be nice. And I'm fine, you know. Somehow the JC Wings A340 looks better than the A330, even though I know 90% of the mould is the same. I've got a couple of these. I've got the Iran Asiman, for example, when I once reviewed the Iberia version. And I did quite like them. And it doesn't seem to suffer in quite the same way that the A330s do. Maybe that's partly because there's a lot less competition for A340s at the moment. I think this is a good choice again. Looking back through, there has been almost nothing made in this space. There's one by Dragon in 2002, and another by Sonic Wings in the same year. All the other Virgin A340s that have been made, apart from one by Aero Classics in 2016, which looks super glittery, are in different schemes. So this one, I think, has got a lot of potential. If I was a Virgin collector, I'd be pretty excited by this one, I think, and I'm going to put this one up into high flyer. The last Airbus to discuss is our 10th model, and this one is in the colours of ITA, or ITA, the Italian flag carrier. It's an A350-900 EI India Foxtrot Alpha. It's wearing their standard scheme, which is, you know, pretty attractive, but it's got an inspired by Alitalia logo on the back end of it. I'm not entirely sure what that's about, but nonetheless, that is the big difference here on this version compared to the other versions which have been released up to this point, of which there have been a few, made by AB400, JC Wings, and Phoenix. So this one again comes in flaps up and down versions, or will do when it ever gets released. It's solid. I don't love the JC Wings A350, but again, it's okay. And I'm not hating this either, to be honest. And again, if you're a collector of this particular airline or airlines of Italy, then you'll probably be pretty happy with it. So again, I'll put this one into high flyer again. I think it's not bad. So with the Airbuses out of the way, that just leaves us with 5 models to discuss, 4 Boeings and an unusual McDonnell Douglas. Model number 11 is a 747-400 Lufthansa Star Alliance D Alpha Bravo Tango Hotel, and this model has been made a few times, as you would expect, but once again hasn't been made for a long time. 19 years the last time someone put one of these out, and that was made by Net Models, so completely forgettable. Gemini did make one in 2004 as well, but again, you know, this is a long time ago. Things have moved along. This is going to come on the lovely new JC mould that I've talked about already in relation to the Singapore Tropical. It will also come in flaps up and down versions. This one is a slam dunk, I think. Don't know of anyone else who's announced it. Hasn't been released for eons. Big seller, surely Lufthansa. Great mould. So there's not really any reason not to put this one up into Supersonic where I'm standing. I think this is probably the standout model of the month when you take into account all those factors. Next model along is an Asiana 767 HL7528. This one is celebrating the last Asiana 767 flight. Not that I believe there's anything on the model which specifically says that. They didn't paint anything on the aircraft for that purpose. So really it's just a run-of-the-mill Asiana 767. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There have been a few in the past, most recently a Phoenix version in 2020, which will be pretty much as good as this one. Again, the mould is showing its age. You've got the seam, you've got the cradle mount here, but it still can look pretty good. Probably, you know, I've generally put it and the Phoenix mould on par. They're good in different ways, they're bad in different ways. Neither of them are up to the standard of the more modern moulds by NG or Panda, but that doesn't make them bad offerings. Again, it's been a long time. You know, you've had that one 5 years ago. Before that, I think there's been another decade before there was a previous one, and then there haven't been a lot of these, and it's celebrating a special occasion with that reg. Yeah, I'm going to put this one into high flyer as well, to be honest. Again, probably not a model that I'm going to collect, but I can see why they're releasing it, and it makes sense. And in many ways, that goes for most of the Boeings, including the next two that we've got in the list. Because model number 13 is a United 777-200, and it's wearing the Unicon scheme, so the merger livery, the first merger livery after United and Continental joined up. Basically, the Continental scheme with just big United titles on it. Not the most beautiful scheme in the universe by any means, I agree, but nonetheless, still an important one for the airline. N78001 is the reg, and the aircraft is called Gordon M. Bethune, so named after an important historical figure. Looking back through the releases, there haven't been many of these either, to be honest. Gemini made one on the seamed mould in 2019, and they made one prior to that in 2016, but those are both, and it looks like they made one in 2012 too. So they made one every 2 or 3 years, but they're all on that old seamed mould. This will be on the much nicer and newer slotted wings mould that JC and Gemini now use. This one also comes in flaps up and downs. Again, as long as they get the copy windows printed in the right place, this should be a really nice model, and it's a pretty worthy release considering the gap between this and the last version of it, which is 6 years now. So again, another solid release that I can't really complain about. Again, way too modern for my collection, but a good model it ought to be nonetheless, and I'll put this one in high fly as well. And we end our look at the Boeings with a model which, again, completely not my cup of tea, but again, makes perfect sense as a release. And this one is T-Way Air, and it is a 777-300ER, registered HL8706. Now, T-Way's actually not got a dreadful livery, considering it's, I believe, a low-cost airline, and they've recently picked up their first 777 for some new long-haul flights, and the scheme actually fits it surprisingly well. If it wasn't for the titles being a little bit childish, then you could almost take this scheme and you might think it's a full-service carrier. Again, this one's going to come in flaps up and down varieties. Nobody else has announced it. The mould's really good. There's nothing to really get upset about, except that T-Way has been a naff airline. So it's pretty much high fly material. If you're collecting modern Asian wide bodies, this should be right up your alley, and nobody else has announced it. So it's a good model, high flyer. And we finish this month's JC vid with a McDonnell Douglas product, but a McDonnell Douglas wide body, and that's quite a rarity from JC. So what we've got here is Air New Zealand DC-1030 ZK NZQ. Now, I perhaps should be more excited by this one than I am, and I think the reason I'm not overly excited is because it's going to come on the Gemini mould, I think, which is old, but okay, but it's old, so it's hard to get overly excited. Gemini actually did make a version, NZN, they made that in 2005 for Skyjets. Not a very common model and very hard to find. Aero Classics have made two versions, one in 2018. So again, I've got that model actually, it's really nice, hard to find. So I can see a lot of collectors will be interested in this because it's so hard to get hold of in a New Zealand DC-10. but I'm not overly excited by the mould, which I guess has been a running theme of this video, thinking about it. I'm going to put this on the high flyer as well, because I can see the demand is there, but I can't say that I'm over the moon with the mould, even though it probably will look better with some updated gear and aerials. Okay, well that's a look at 15 releases from JC Wings for this March, though quite a few have got flaps up and down variants, or will have if they ever get made. There's a surprising amount of high flyer in this set, and when I first looked at this video, or doing this video, I was thinking this isn't going to be that good a set, but actually looking at it, a lot of these models have got really strong reasons to be made, and that is good. My only concern here for a lot of these releases is the molds are quite substandard. The A330 mold is the A340-600 mold, the 767-200, the A220, the A350, and the DC-10, and the 767-300. They're all kind of just molds that exist now. They're very mid-range. They're not really knocking it out of the park. Now, if you look at some of the molds here, they're great. The 777s, the 747-400s, and the 787, they're really good. But then you've got molds like the A300, which really should never have been drugged or dragged out of whatever grave that was in. It should have just been left there to rest in peace, because it's such a poor mold. And if there's a criticism of JC, is that they don't know what their best products are, or just don't care that much, and they'll still produce models even though the molds sometimes stink. So that's not great, because I really like to see a Korean A300, but I am not interested in this one. So it's an okay set. There's a lot of future stuff here though, so again, don't pre-order it, that's silly. But hopefully, and I've got some faith, that JC's production delay issue will not be as marked as it has been in the past, and they will get these models out within at least 9 months of them being announced. Okay, great. Anyway, that's this video done. I have seen that Phoenix have also just announced models. I'm not sure if that counts as their Feb set or their March set, to be honest. But nonetheless, there is a Phoenix video that will no doubt be coming in the next week or two. So keep an eye out for that. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to drop me a comment and say which of these models you think are really going to be good and which ones you're interested in getting. Always interested to see that. But until next time, that's it from me. Goodbye.